Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Diversity Principle, the new podcast where anything can and probably will happen. My name is Geozaki. I have been doing random shit on the internet for about, I don't know how many years. So I don't know why I was going to go and say that. I mean, I started on YouTube back, in 2013, the first day of, in fact. But I was using the internet before that, so since I was old enough to use the internet, probably. But I've wanted to make a podcast for a very long time, and due to things never quite working out as hoped, I've never really been able to do it. There have been many podcasts in the works under various different names and with various different people, and each one of them seems to have fallen short just as it started, just before it started, or just after it started. So hopefully this one won't suffer the same fate. I would really like this one to carry on for a little while. This is actually the second attempted recording at this podcast. I did film this entire episode previously, but I was a nervous wreck at the time, and honestly it shows in the episode, and it is awful. So I thought I would try and re-record it, because I'd rather re-record it and it be marginally better than just plow ahead with what I'd already done, knowing it's likely to be terrible. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube right now, then future episodes are planned to include a webcam showing me and potential guests who are on the podcast with me for that episode. The only reason that is not the case on this episode is because a lot's been going on where I live recently. The whole village has been through a bit of a trauma, and I think the dysphoria related to my voice is more than enough dysphoria for me. I don't really want to deal with the task of having to see my face as well, so we're just going to go with audio only this time. But the plan for future episodes is to have audio only versions of this podcast available on certain platforms. Not getting my hopes up too much, but I like the idea of it being on Spotify. And then a video version to be filmed and put up on YouTube. So that should happen in the future. And I apologize for this, the first episode and the pilot episode, that is not the case. I don't make any promises, but that's the aim. That's the vision. Before we get into the intricacies of this episode, I guess, I thought I would start by explaining the name of the podcast, the diversity principle, because it's uncharacteristically interesting for a name decision from me. And so I thought I would explain it, maybe help you guys understand what I'm aiming for a bit better, and it's a good 10 minutes of content. So the name was originally made up because I was on a website that generates puns, and I was just looking through puns that linked to diversity, because I always knew I wanted this podcast to be about a lot of different things. I don't want it to be stuck on one thing week in, week out. I wanted it to be much like my YouTube channel and my Twitch channel, a bit of everything, a little bit of everything, something for everyone. And one of the puns I generated on this just auto-generator app was it had replaced uncertainty in the uncertainty principle with diversity. I thought, oh, diversity principle has a nice ring to it, but I don't actually know what the uncertainty principle is. So I googled it. And the uncertainty principle is a rule in quantum physics, and I spent a lot of time reading what it meant and not understanding it, so I had to Google what it was in kids' version. So this is the kids' description of the uncertainty principle. When it comes to quantum, the smallest piece of matter, you can either know how fast it is going or where it is located, but not both at the same time without being uncertain. And I thought that was quite nice. Sure, I probably don't really understand what it means more than the basic idea that you can't always be right. But I thought the idea that you could never quite predict something 100% with 100% accuracy was a nice idea for this podcast, as I want every episode to be something a little bit different. And I really liked that. But then I thought, oh, you know what? I'll just Google diversity principle, make sure it's not something that's heavily copyrighted or something. And it's not, as far as I could find. But I did find that in law, the diversity principle is a rule which suggests that when you are presenting evidence, the diversity of your evidence is more important than the quantity of your evidence. So, for example, if you were to submit 500 pieces of very similar evidence, it wouldn't have as much impact as 5 pieces of vastly different evidence. And I thought I quite like that even better, nearly, because this podcast will aim to be something slightly different every time. And so the name of the podcast not only suggests that in the ilk of the quantum physics rule, that it will be unpredictable, but also through the law rule suggests that having a large diversity of different topics available and differences in the episodes is better than just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And I quite like that. So I'm running with it. Now that I've talked about that, I'm going to do something that is very weird for me and very briefly talk about myself, because I'm aware that most of the people listening to this right now probably are already familiar with me through either real life or my YouTube channel or my Twitch channel. But just for those who might be new to my presence on the internet, which is a potential because not many people on the internet know me. I'm no massive sensation by any method. I don't know if you could hear that. My computer just decided to make a notification sound, which was very unhelpful. So I don't know if it came through. If it did, I'm very sorry. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Geozaki. My real name is Samantha Knight. I am Welsh. I'm very proud to be Welsh. Love living in Wales. I am transgender, male to female, which I hate saying out loud because I kind of like to think that I'll get away with people just assuming I'm female if they don't already know me. But I think my voice is probably enough of a giveaway that I'm not. And so by announcing it, maybe people will at least understand a little bit. I've also recently been diagnosed with autism, and I am an avid animal lover. I own a dog. She's beautiful. She's a collie, and her name is May May. We did have 2 collies until last year, but towards the end of last year, we lost our other dog due to dementia, which was potentially one of the worst things I've ever experienced in my life. But she was a good girl. But we still have May May, and May May is a very good girl. I am an avid gamer, so there will be a lot of gaming topics on this podcast. Obviously, they'll be intermixed. Is intermixed a word? I don't know, but they'll be intermixed with other topics. I mean, this episode, despite it being the first episode of a podcast created by me, an avid gamer, has only one gaming topic in it. So, or at least that's the plan. When I've been talking for a little bit, that might have changed. My favourite colour is yellow. I work at a pub. I really like editing and writing. I'm a bit of an obsessive collector. Not of anything necessarily valuable financially, but things that I like and have sentimental value. I would list collections, but as I recently realised when I went to my ASD assessment, I have more collections of things than I will be able to remember, and no one wants just a list. If Family Guy has taught me one thing, it's that the podcast where Peter just spends the entire time listing off hats he can think of was not the biggest hit. So I'm not going to do an episode where I just list off collections I have. At least not for the first episode. Maybe in a few episodes' time we'll get to that, but not today. Not today. Don't want to scare people off right off the bat, although I may have already done that, so we'll see. So yeah, that's me. I've probably told you a lot of irrelevant things, and there are probably some more important things or more interesting things about me that I haven't told you, although I'm not very interesting. But there's a vague outline, and I'm sure you'll learn more about me as this goes on if you decide to continue watching and / or listening. So the first topic I wanted to talk about on this inaugural episode is actually Formula One, which is a sport, and I would like to say that sport probably won't be a massive recurring theme because I'm not much of a sports person, but having said that, I have become, over the past few years, quite addicted to Formula One, and as a Welsh person, rugby is quite important to us, and I'm going to talk about football later on, which is probably one of my least favourite sports of all time. So, who knows? But don't expect sports all the time. Having said that, here's some sports. So, the 2022 season of Formula One recently ended. When I first made the notes for this episode, it had ended about a week or two ago. But now it's been, nearly a month? And this season in Formula One was pretty crazy. They introduced arguably the biggest rule change in Formula One history in one go. Brought back ground effect cars, which work fundamentally very differently to the cars we've been used for the past, 30 years? 40 years maybe even? And the cost cap was reduced even further, and a lot of the changes were intended to sort of bunch the pack up a bit more and to make overtaking more viable. And there's a lot of discussion on whether or not the regulation change has worked. I think it's hard to tell after only one season. The first season of any major regulation change is always a bit weird. I mean, there was that change a few years back. I can't remember the year because I didn't plan to talk about this, so I didn't look it up. But the year that Brawn GP won, after Ross Brawn bought it for £1 from Honda, who were leaving the sport. That was in the first year of the regulation change, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, an underdog won. Maybe this is a new era. And then Brawn stopped existing after winning. So it's always hard to tell on a first year, I think. But as much as I would say that we haven't really had the pack rumbled up too much. Yeah, teams finished in different positions, but the front runners were still Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull, and the back of the grid were still Haas and Williams, and everyone else was still a midfield team, although Haas have dragged themselves up that listing quite dramatically. It was not a major shake-up like I think a lot of people were expecting, other than, of course, Mercedes getting dethroned. But it did seem that overtaking was a lot easier. It still is heavily reliant on DRS, which I know is something they're hoping to fix in upcoming seasons at some point. But it was overall a good season. I think any season would have fallen short after last season. Our epic match, Battle of the Titans between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, which, no, I'm not going to talk about Abu Dhabi, because I think it's been done to death. Yes, I have my own opinions. Again, maybe I'll bring them up some other time. But for now, I would simply like to say everyone needs to calm down just a little bit. Whether you're a Max fan, a Lewis fan, or an anyone else fan, just calm down. Yeah, cool. 2022 was exciting though. Max Verstappen won Japan, which was 4, 5, 6 races before the end of the season, and he didn't know he'd won. No one knew he'd actually won the World Championship until about 10 minutes after the race had ended, when he was in the cool-down room, and they were like, oh, you are World Champion. So that was a bit confusing. But Max did win, and despite the whole cost cap stuff and what people think after whatever with Red Bull and controversy, I think that it's definitely a very well-deserved win for Max. He has been indomitable this year, which is a big word for me, indomitable. So I'm quite proud of myself right now. But he has just been in a league of his own. Of course, a lot of that is down to Red Bull as well. Adrian Newey came out of the doors on this one absolutely on fire. Yes, they had some technical issues at the beginning of the year with those 2 DNFs, but they've been incredible since then. Max Verstappen won 15, I believe, of the 22 races this year, which is a new record for the most wins in a single season. And Red Bull as a team won 17. That's only 5 races that they didn't get first in, which is insane. Ferrari started the season looking really strong. It looked like by sort of race 4, race 5, people were already congratulating Charles Leclerc on winning the World Championship. And then, as most Formula 1 people I follow on the internet and in real life have said, Ferrari remembered they were Ferrari and completely threw it all out the window. I think that even without the massive mistakes, they would have had to fight really hard to keep themselves in the standings, but maybe it would have at least come down to the last race or the second to last race. But there was a real glimmer of hope there for a little bit, and it just sort of vanished. And on that note, there's been a lot of news today as of recording this episode. So a few days ago, it was announced that Mattia Binotto was stepping down as principal from Ferrari. It has been worded that he resigned, but a lot of people think he jumped before he was pushed. So it's hard to tell for sure, but Ferrari does have a tendency to fire people the moment they're not instantaneously exactly what they need. Then today, I believe, Frederic Vasseur, for the team principal for Alfa Romeo, stepped down from his position in Alfa Romeo. And then like half an hour later, it was announced that he would be taking the team principal slot for Ferrari in place of Mattia Binotto. Then it was announced that Andreas Seidel would be leaving McLaren and will be joining Alfa Romeo as a CEO. And then it was announced that Andrea Stella will be the new McLaren team principal. Then it was announced, I say then actually, I think this one happened before a lot of that. My timeline's a bit wonky, so apologies for that. But also, it's been announced that Jos Capito will no longer be the team principal of Williams, which I really didn't see coming at all. Like, the others had a sort of through line. It's been rumoured that Mattia Binotto was going to leave for some weeks now, and then he did, and it was rumoured that Frederic Vasseur was going to replace him, and then he did, and of course McLaren would need to fill Andreas Seidel's position, although we didn't know that he was going to go over to Alfa Romeo. But Jos Capito leaving just kind of came out of nowhere. But then Williams have had an even worse year than they've had in recent times, which is quite impressive. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily all on Jos Capito, but of course as the team principal, he is where all the blame will fall. And it seems that's what has been decided by, is it Dorlton Limited? Is that the name of the team who's taken over Williams? Dorlton Capital, that's what it's called. To add to the drama of this year, this is all before today's changes, obviously, but Lewis Hamilton, for the first time in his Formula 1 career, didn't get a single win throughout a season. He has always managed it. Even when he wasn't fighting for the title, he's always managed to get at least one win, and he just couldn't this year. His teammate, George Russell, took the one and only win for Mercedes all year in Brazil, which I don't think is a sentence anyone expected to be saying at the end of 2021. Oh yes, Mercedes will get one win all year, and even that was close. We had the drama at the beginning of the year, of course, when a madman in charge of a big country decided to invade a neighbouring country for no reason other than he's a madman. And of course, Haas had a lot of question marks over their heads when that happened, because they were being sponsored by Uralkali. I may be horribly butchering the pronunciation there, so apologies on that. Which is a massive Russian business. And the owner of Uralkali was in the meeting with Putin just before he declared war. And one of their drivers, Nikita Mazepin, was the son of Dmitry Mazepin, the owner of Uralkali. And so there was a lot of questions about that for a while, but it was eventually revealed, and by eventually I mean it took a few days, but it felt like an eternity. Haas stripped all the Russian flag colours off their car, because of course they did, and announced that they would no longer be partnered with Uralkali. And then they let go of Nikita Mazepin, not only because of his connection to the business and the country, and with there being restrictions on Russian athletes participating in sports as a response to the war, but also because Nikita Mazepin wasn't the best driver, and he didn't exactly make up with it by being likable either. I know this is harsh, but he was doing badly and then blaming everyone else for his poor performance. He even asserted that Haas had given him a weaker car to make him look bad in comparison to Mick Schumacher, which is not the case. Apologies if you heard that. One of the dogs that I'm currently looking after decided that was a point to complain about something. Not long after the whole Haas and war incident, there was a massive incident at the Saudi Arabia track when a missile hit an Aramco site, an Aramco oil refinery, if I'm not mistaken, which was positioned only a few miles away from the track. There was a massive fireball, smoke and fire clearly visible from the track. The drivers had an emergency meeting that lasted until the early hours of the morning, sort of 2-3 o'clock, if I'm remembering correctly. And there were real worries that the race wouldn't be held, and arguably the race shouldn't have been held, but the drivers managed to reach an agreement with everyone involved on safety grounds, and it did go ahead, but it was scary. And everyone's like, oh, it's all right, they were targeting the Aramco facility. And you're like, yeah, that's fine, but the Saudi Arabia track is completely covered in signs that broadcast the word Aramco so bright and so big that you could probably see it from space. We had some pretty massive crashes this year, some scary ones. There was Mick Schumacher in also Saudi Arabia, I believe, to the point where he was unable to participate in the race due to the damage to his car. He, thank God, was okay. It was worrying for a while because he didn't get out of the car for some time and was rushed to the hospital, not even just the medical centre, the hospital. But he was absolutely fine, thank God. I would say the other scariest crash of the year was Zhou Guanyu at Silverstone, where he just got clipped at the beginning of the race, and his car flipped upside down, and he went soaring across the track through the gravel, and then he was flung over the barrier and into the catch fence and was stuck between the barrier and the catch fence for some time. I think it was about 45 minutes before anyone knew if he was okay. And again, thank Christ he was fine, but investigation revealed that the roll hoop on the car had snapped. It had failed during the crash. And so as a result, this year coming, all roll hoop regulations are being tweaked to make sure that they are safer. And I know I say this every opportunity, but thank Christ for the halo, because without it, I can almost guarantee you we would have lost Zhou Guanyu this year. There have also been some massive changes in the driver lineup for this year coming. We are, of course, losing Sebastian Vettel, one of the greatest F1 drivers of all time, I would say. An absolute legend of a man and a driver, and I know that he will be sorely missed on the grid. And hopefully he'll hang around and maybe do some commentating or some snooping around at some point. We're also losing Daniel Ricciardo for next year. When I originally filmed this episode, his future was uncertain, but it has now been announced that he will be joining Red Bull as their reserve driver and as their sort of public figurehead. He'll be doing a lot of commercial things for the team. Nicholas Latifi at Williams has lost his drive, which, I want to say is sad because arguably one of the biggest memes to come out of Formula 1 for a very long time is Lord Gotifi and his Nutella. But there are definitely better drivers who deserve that seat. And I really hope that whatever he goes on to do, he does it well. But after the silliest of silly seasons, next year's driver lineup is as follows. For Red Bull, we will still have Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, no change there. Also no change in Alfa Romeo, where we still have Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Ferrari also has no change with Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Haas keeps Kevin Magnussen but replaces Mick Schumacher with Nico Hülkenberg. Alpine keeps Esteban Ocon and replaces Fernando Alonso with Pierre Gasly. AlphaTauri has Yuki Tsunoda and replaces Pierre Gasly with Nick De Vries. Mercedes keeps Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. Aston Martin keeps Lance Stroll and has Fernando Alonso replace Sebastian Vettel. McLaren keeps Lando Norris and replaces Daniel Ricciardo with Oscar Piastri. And Williams keeps Alex Albon and replaces Nicholas Latifi with Logan Sargent. There's also been a lot of talk about the FIA this year. Of course, after the controversy at last year's Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, Michael Massey was fired. The FIA made a lot of changes to how the races were ruled and judged and controlled, and everyone was expecting this to be a sort of really easy to follow, really clear-cut year. But it was all over the place. One race had very different rules to other races, likely due to the fact that we had two race directors rotating and a rotating group of stewards. But no one ever seemed to know where they stood. One race, something would get you no penalty at all, and the next race you'd get 5 seconds for it. It was very weird. But I think the biggest mess up from the FIA's point was Suzuka. Suzuka at Japan was really wet, and the race didn't really get going for ages, but it did start when it was meant to, and about a lap, maybe two, I think it was only one, but maybe 2 laps were completed under normal race conditions before the race was red flagged due to the rain and lack of visibility. Within that first lap, Carlos Sainz aquaplaned and crashed off the track, which is what caused a yellow flag, which eventually became a red flag. The yellow flags came out, and recovery vehicles were sent out to the track to pick up Carlos's car. During this time, Pierre Gasly, who had to pit because one of the advertising boards had wrecked his front wing, was trying to catch up with the safety car pack, because the yellow flags were a safety car. I misspoke, I'm very sorry. So was driving quicker, as you're allowed to do when you catch up to a safety car. And while he was doing this, he almost crashed into the recovery vehicle that was trying to retrieve Carlos Sainz's car, because he couldn't see it until the very last minute, and he sort of swerved out of the way. A lot of people were like, oh, it's his fault, he shouldn't have been driving so fast, he was speeding under red flags. The FIA did claim he was speeding, but the speeding allocations from the FIA were for the corner after the recovery vehicle, not during or before it. And a lot of people have been saying, yeah, but they always dispatch recovery cars under safety cars, that's how it works. But honestly, I don't think there's any excuse for what happened, because not only was the visibility awful, and they should have waited for every single car to be off that track before they even entertained anything like this, especially when the incident was aquaplaning, because aquaplaning is something that's not within the driver's control at all. Aquaplaning is the term for when you're driving along, and essentially the car can't displace the water quickly enough, And so what you end up happening is the car, rather than driving through the water, ends up sliding across the top of the water. And that sort of barrier that the water forms between the car and the road essentially makes the car handle as if you're driving on ice. So there is no way to control it. And once you start aquaplaning, it's very difficult to stop. Nigh on impossible, and in some cases it is impossible. And so if Gasly had also aquaplaned like Carlos Sainz had, he'd have had no control and would have likely gone barreling into the recovery vehicle. This is made even worse by a tragedy of modern Formula One. Back in 2014, there was a wet race at Suzuka. During the race, one of the cars aquaplaned and crashed off the track. The safety car was brought out, all the cars were stacked up behind it, and a recovery vehicle was dispatched to recover the car. During the time the recovery vehicle was on track, Jules Bianchi came round the same corner, and in the exact same place, his car aquaplaned. He lost control, and his car ploughed straight into the underside of the recovery vehicle. He was rushed to a hospital and was in a critical condition until May of the following year, so about half a year later, where he finally died due to his injuries from the crash. This all happened at Suzuka. And the fact that no one in the FIA or the marshalling team or at the racetrack went, you know what's a really stupid idea, is putting a recovery vehicle out while the drivers can barely see after a car has just aquaplaned off the track, is astonishing to me. Why did no one flag up that that was a terrible idea? And if Gasly hadn't have noticed it when he did, or if he had aquaplaned like Carlos did, there's every chance that he would not still be with us, and that is a terrifying thought. So, from my year, regardless of all the inconsistencies, I think we need to make sure that that never happens again. There's a lot of arguments been put forward that, there's always a recovery vehicle when there's been a crash, especially under a safety car. But I think it needs to be made very clear that there is a difference between a safety car when it's sunny and clear and visibility is perfect and the car just had an accident and is quite way off the track, and yes, let's put a recovery vehicle on the track, because it wasn't off the track, it was on the track, as was a marshal, because Gasly almost ran into the marshal as well, because the marshal was in the middle of the track. Oh yes, let's put a recovery vehicle on the track when people are practically blind in these cars that go 200 miles an hour, when a car has aquaplaned off the road. I think that needs to never happen again, and the fact that it happened this year was shocking. Overall, though, I think it was an exciting season, and I'm very much looking forward to next season. It's only been, like I said earlier, about a month since Formula One ended, and it feels like an eternity. So, when it starts up again, I'm sure it'll be popping up in this podcast a little bit more. The next topic I want to talk about on this episode is a gaming topic. So, I did warn you at the beginning. Here is our gaming topic for today. And I wanted to talk about Overwatch 2. For those of you who are unaware, Overwatch was a game by Blizzard. It's a team-based shooter that had two teams of 6, in PvP matches, face off against each other, see who wins. You know, like shooters, team-based shooting games work. Some years ago, Overwatch 2 was announced, which was essentially going to be the story game, the story mode for the game, because it was multiplayer only, but has a really rich lore. And there was a lot of negative reception about it. A lot of people thought that they weren't making a second game, that they were just upgrading the first one and releasing it at full price. At the time, we didn't know price. We didn't know the cost of the game. We didn't know when it was coming out, what the new features were. But the game director of Overwatch at the time, Jeff Kaplan, had announced that while the new game would be getting a new user interface and would be getting the story mode and new PvE modes, that the PvP, which is the base of Overwatch 1, would be getting upgrades across Overwatch 2 and Overwatch 1, but the new cosmetics and such would only be available in Overwatch 2. This was as a gesture that if anyone had Overwatch 1 but didn't want to play Overwatch 2 and buy Overwatch 2 because they weren't interested in the story, they could still play with their friends who had Overwatch 2. I've been a devout advocate for this idea for a very long time. Everyone's been like, oh, it's not a sequel, it's just the same game repackaged, it's not fair. And I completely disagreed with the concept that was just a sequel. The concept for Overwatch 2, I think, was brilliant. Yes, we're going to release a story game, and we're going to let it connect to our multiplayer game, and still let people who don't want to pay for the story game play with their friends who may only have the story version of the game. I think it was a really solid idea. And I've spent a lot of time talking in favour of it online over the past few years. And unfortunately, this is not the idea they went with at all. It's worth mentioning that the Overwatch team went through some massive changes since Overwatch 2 was announced. Jeff Kaplan is no longer the game director. Blizzard as a company have faced some awful allegations and have fallen from their, oh, what a nice gaming company reputation to, oh my god, they are all assholes. And so Overwatch 2 is drastically different to that first promise we were given. First off, it is not linkable to Overwatch 1 in any way, shape or form, because Overwatch 1 has been shut down to make way for Overwatch 2. Overwatch 2 is free to play, which sounds like a good thing on the surface, but is actually terrible because in Overwatch 1 they had a loot box system, which I'm sure if you've never played Overwatch, the mention of a loot box system is probably enough to make you sigh in despair. But I've always felt that the Overwatch loot box system was decent. It didn't offer you anything that was pay to win. There were no advantages. It was purely for the cosmetic items. And you got loot boxes fairly quickly. Every time you leveled up, which, depending on how well you played, was every sort of, I would say, 5 to 20 games, depending on what game mode you played and how well you performed and how long the games were, you would get a loot box. And every week you could earn up to 3 loot boxes for playing the game's arcade modes. It would award you one for every 3 wins for your first 9 wins that week in the arcade, which was sort of game modes just for fun if you didn't want to play the base game. And there were also loot boxes given out for other things, like if you were touted as a good member of the community, a good person to play with by your fellow gamers, they would give you loot boxes as a reward for that. Sometimes loot boxes were offered up as encouragement for playing roles that needed filling to help the queue times go down. And the loot boxes were quite nice. You would get 4 items in a loot box. On average, you would only get a legendary item every sort of 12 loot boxes, but you still got 4 different items every loot box. And in the later stages of Overwatch 1's life, the numbers had been tweaked quite dramatically. So the chances of you getting duplicate items were insanely rare, especially until you ended up having a large amount of items. The more items you got, obviously, the more likely you were to get double. But when you had duplicate items, those items were converted into a currency called credits, which you could then use to buy any cosmetic item in the game, other than limited time cosmetics. But you always knew that the vast majority of those limited time cosmetics were linked to an event, such as the Halloween event and the Christmas event. And every year, last year's and the year before's anniversary or Halloween or Christmas event items were available again. And over the anniversaries, items from all events were available to unlock. So you never felt like you were facing impossible odds, and while you could buy loot boxes, I never felt like it was a necessity. And I did buy loot boxes from time to time, because I never felt like I was being ripped off. You know, the cheapest loot box package, I think, was about £4, and it would give you 5 loot boxes, which, with 4 items per loot box, was 20 items for a £5. So sometimes during an event, I did do that. and there were nice rewards for buying certain loot boxes, and you got rewards for watching the Overwatch League. And then in Overwatch 2, they completely changed it. Because it's free to play, they've now aggressively monetized it. And loot boxes have been scrapped. And the way you now earn skins and sprays and other cosmetics is through either a battle pass, which honestly is one of the not so great battle passes I've encountered. It costs money every season, and you do not earn any of the currency through playing it, so you can't buy it once and then if you keep playing the game make up enough to buy the next one or half of the next one. Not in any way, shape or form can you earn any of that currency back. It's one of those battle passes that offers you a 20% XP boost when you've bought it, which really annoys me because it's essentially going, oh, unless you buy it, you're not really going to be able to level it up quickly enough. And I generally quite like to buy battle passes based on whether or not I know I've made enough progress to justify it. And on top of that, that XP, as far as I'm aware, is not granted in hindsight. If you play 10 matches and then buy the battle pass, it doesn't give you 20% XP on those first 10 matches. So it feels very much like a you have to buy it immediately without thinking kind of mechanic, and I don't like it at all. The challenges that grant you battle pass XP are really difficult and take forever, and although your weekly challenges do reward you with credits, it's a pathetically tiny amount of credits. They're not called credits anymore, they're called gold now. But someone worked out that to buy all of the skins for one of the heroes in the game, it would take you about 3 years of getting those weekly challenges correct and fully completed every week. And it's quite exasperating. The prices of skins, if you buy them from the shop, are just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. We're talking like £20-30 for a single skin here. I have never seen a game cause people to beg for loot boxes to come back like this in my life. Season 2 has just started, and it has changed a little bit. The cosmetics in the battle pass this time, I would say, are generally of higher quality, but that's probably a subjective thing. They just seem like more effort's gone into them, but I haven't done like an in-depth analysis of them, so maybe I'll look into it better, but they do feel nicer. But the prices are still ridiculous. There's still very little motivation to play. The game feels so unrewarding because you get a battle pass level every few games, but only if you do well and complete challenges. And even when you own the battle pass, the game feels unrewarding. They have announced that there will be changes to make it feel more rewarding, and they have already had to make changes because they actually ended up breaking laws in some countries on the sale of items. But they have to do something quite dramatic, in my opinion, for it to be a game that I would return to as consistently as I did the first game. On the gameplay side, very little has changed other than the teams are now 5 players each, not 6 players each, and so some of the balancing has changed to accommodate for that. But I'm not of a high enough level to say how that's really adjusted the gameplay, other than as someone whose main is D.Va, who is a tank, we are now restricted to one tank only in the role queue game mode, which means that whereas in Overwatch 1, it took a long time to queue for DPS, but both tank and support were quite needed characters, and so you would often be able to join both of them relatively quickly. Supports were still the easiest to join for, but sometimes, on rare occasions, the tanks were the role that needed more players. Whereas in new Overwatch, in Overwatch 2, it's always the supports, and so many of the challenges are essentially play support so that the queue times are quicker, that you just get forced into playing support all the time if you want to work on your battle pass, and it's draining. I love playing support, but I want to play other characters too, especially with role queue being implemented, and a lot of people are saying, oh, Overwatch 2 has brought back open queue as a normal game mode and competitive game mode, and it has, and it's probably my favourite change of Overwatch 2. I love it. Thank you for that one, Overwatch team. But so many of the challenges are play any role in role queue, which is essentially you pick the button that just will find a quick game for you and throw you in that role, which essentially means support, and you have to win like 7 games. It used to be 10. They did make the challenges a little bit easier, only a little bit, but now it's you have to win 7 games is all roles, and that means if we assume you win half of your games, 14 games where you are stuck in support for a week, every week. So if you're trying to grind, you never get to play anyone other than one of the few support characters. Not only that, but supports have become a lot harder and less rewarding to play. And with role queue, there's only 6 of them. They are the smallest pool of heroes for a class, I believe. And so you're just stuck with the same few characters all the time. And especially if you're not a support main, it's quite disheartening. I like to consider myself a flex. I'm quite happy playing most heroes, but D.Va is still my favourite. D.Va is still the character I would pick if I wanted to, and I have a lot of love for a lot of the tank and DPS characters. I just never get to play them. So yeah, overall I would say Overwatch 2 so far is a massive disappointment. It's not even launched with the story mode, which was the whole reason for Overwatch 2 ever even existing, and I'm severely underwhelmed at this point. I think Kotaku have named it the biggest gaming disappointment of 2022. And I can't disagree with that. I think it's probably easier if you're a brand new player to Overwatch 2. But for anyone who fell in love with Overwatch 1, it's just a massive kick in the teeth. And I think I know quite a few new players as well who are joining in and going, well, this is over-monetized and quite hard to get your head round and clearly just a scammy money grab, and have stopped playing it, which is a real shame because when they announced it would be free to play, I got really excited about being able to play it with all the people who would never play it because they didn't want to buy it. And none of them have played it for more than 10 minutes because they've been disheartened by the whole experience. So Blizzard, please, for us, the people who love your game, make it a great game again. Make it fun, make it rewarding. Even if you still have certain things locked behind a paywall, make it easier to earn those gold coins, or make some cosmetics unlockable for just playing and not buying, or something. But it has to be something quite amazing, or a lot of people are going to stop playing, and I probably include myself in that. I have played, I think, a grand total of 2 matches in Season 2, and Season 2 has been going for the past 7 days. In old Overwatch, the launch of a new hero would have kept me playing all week, pretty much. But no. Actually, I will give you a tip on new heroes, because in Overwatch, the first Overwatch, when a new hero was launched, there was a huge culture around hopping into the game, going into No Limits, which is the game mode where anyone can be the same hero if they want to, and everyone would pick the new hero and try it out against each other, and it was really fun, and there'd be loads of custom games, and then you get that point where people had started to figure out what specifically counters the new hero. And so you get teams of just the new hero and their counters, and it brought back so many players every time. But in the new system, new heroes aren't given to you for free. They are given to you if you either buy the battle pass with real money, if you make it to level 40 of the battle pass, which is halfway through and takes a lot of effort, not doable really in the first week unless you pay for it, or you have to wait for the season the hero was released in to end, and then there are challenges you can complete to unlock them. But that means that unless you're willing to pay, you don't get the new hero for some time after they've been released. So I think, even if you want to keep this current system of how players unlock the heroes, which is one of the few parts of Overwatch 2's monetization I understand, I don't mind it. But my recommendation would be give the new hero 1 week of free use. give them a free trial week. They wouldn't be usable in competitive because new heroes never are for the first couple of weeks. And it would mean that players could test them out not just in their hero trial mode, but against other people and enjoy feeling what the character plays like, enjoy the culture of everyone going meme mode for the new heroes release. And I think you'd get a lot more players back on a regular basis. Then, sure, lock it off until someone's unlocked that point in the battle pass, or they've paid for it, or they've finished the challenges. But I think you're really damaging yourselves by not letting everyone play the hero for a little bit for free on release. Because some of the best times I ever had in Overwatch were after Moira was added to the game, or after Brigitte was added, and we all joined in, me, Chaos, and the group we had at the time, joined into custom matches, all playing as Brigitte, or Baguette, as we called her at the time, and we would mess around with her abilities, and we all made her shield bash cooldown instantaneous, and we were all racing around the map really fast as Baguette the Hedgehog, as in reference to Sonic the Hedgehog, because she was speedy. And then Chaos decided to pick Reinhardt, and we all absolutely obliterated him. And it was just a really great time. This wasn't meant to be a plug. None of this rant about heroes is in my notes for this episode. There is a 2-episode part on my YouTube channel, which is Geozaki, called Baguette the Hedgehog Joins the Fight, or something to that extent. And my content creation skills aren't the best. And they're not the best produced videos at all. They were just taken from a stream, I believe, of when we were playing with Baguette when she was first released. But we had such a great time, and I really feel it comes through at least a little bit in the video. So if you want to know what I mean by the weird culture there used to be around new heroes in Overwatch, go and watch those, okay? And I'm not saying that because I need ad revenue or anything, because I don't get ad revenue. It's just this is what I mean. You know, check me out while you're there if you want to, but there are better YouTube channels out there. Much better. But there was something really special about it, and I think Overwatch would really benefit from that coming back again. The next topic I wanted to talk about was the World Cup. Now, some of the things I wanted to talk about have changed slightly because it's been a few weeks since then. When I was originally going to record this, Wales were looking like they could be eliminated at any moment. We had just been defeated by Iran, and we had 3 potential possibilities for staying in the championship. One was we needed to beat England with a sweep of 6 points. If we'd have beat them by 6 points or more, we would have stayed in the competition regardless. 2, America and Iran draw, and we beat England. The reason it was 3 possibilities is the 6 sweep was if either Iran or America won, we needed the 6 sweep to make it up. But if they drew, we just needed the win to go through to the next round. Since then, we have been eliminated. We were demolished by England, but as a country, I think, as much as we're all upset that it ended so soon, I say we're all upset. I only watch the football because we're in it. I'm not much of a football person. But as much as everyone's feeling a bit like it ended prematurely, it's worth mentioning that Wales hasn't made it through to that stage of the World Cup since 1958, which is over 6 decades ago, if my maths isn't letting me down. So, yes, disappointing, but we did pretty well for a Welsh team. We made it. We've done better than any Welsh team has done in half a century. So, yeah, it ended a bit anticlimactically for us, but maybe in the next 4 years we'll come back even stronger. But the other thing I wanted to talk about with regards to the World Cup was the politics. I'm not much of a politics person in general. My live streams and my videos have a a fairly strict non-politics rule. I will avoid the topic as much as possible because I like the idea of being someone who entertains just for a bit of fun, not someone who drags everyone back to the shattering reality that is life. But Qatar has been shit. It's been quite a rollercoaster for me. I'm not much of a football fan, and part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of the reason is that I've always felt alienated by football fans. That I also find the game largely dull. Sorry, but I do. There's a lot of people pretending they're hurt, and it stresses me out. And very few exciting things happen in a game. Like, people go, oh, that was a really exciting game when there were, 2 goals. If you like football, I have nothing against you. Continue to like football. I'm glad you like it. It's just not my cup of tea. I have been watching it and getting part of the sort of, yeah, come on, Wales spirit, but it's still not my favourite sport in the world. But please don't hate me. I just don't like it. If you like it, that's great. But Qatar have been awful. So yeah, I went through a bit of a rollercoaster because one of the things I've always felt from football players is that as a trans woman, I've never really been all that welcome because you've either got the people who recognise me as a woman, which is great, but have then been annoyed at me because it's a man's sport, and some of the other football players I have and fans who I've spent time with have clocked that I'm a part of the LGBT community and disliked me being there for that. There was a study done in the UK, and 8% of football fans said that they would just flat stop supporting their team if they had a gay player. Never mind a trans player who is also pansexual. Which is what I identify as. But when the World Cup started, none of the channels shied away from the fact that human rights in Qatar and workers' rights in Qatar and LGBT people and people who want relationships without marriage are awful. The whole country's human rights and workers' rights are terrible. And to my surprise, the BBC did not shy away from this, which is what we've been watching it on here in Britain. They were very vocal about how it's awful, and I have nothing but respect for that. And then they were interviewing fans, and all the fans were like, yeah, you know what? This is wrong. Sure, there are nice arenas and it's a nice vibe, but football should be for everyone, not just the people who meet Qatar's expectations. And I was like, you know what? I've judged the football community badly. I've judged you all wrong. There are obviously football people. I know that not everyone in the football community are, discriminative. In fact, I know that most football fans are not discriminative. But you know what it's like. Most vegans are wonderful people. Most of the vegans I know are lovely people. But the 2% of them who decide to attack everyone because they're not vegan ruin it for everyone, And I know a lot of football people who are lovely people. But you always encounter the negative because they speak louder, don't you? So I was pleasantly surprised. Like, okay, I was wrong. And then FIFA attacked. So some of the teams, Wales included, were planning to wear armbands that said One Love and had a progress heart on it as a stand against the bad human rights and diversity principles in Qatar. And the night before the first match, FIFA announced they would not be allowing it. And I want to read now for you the Welsh team's official statement on the matter, because this is how I found out, and it does the whole thing more justice than I could do by trying to paraphrase it off memory. The Welsh statement reads as follows. FIFA has been very clear that it will impose sporting sanctions if our captains wear the armbands on the field of play. As national federations, we can't put our players in a position where they could face sporting sanctions, including bookings, so we have asked the captains not to attempt to wear the armbands in FIFA World Cup games. We were prepared to pay fines that would normally apply to breaches of kit regulations and had a strong commitment to wearing the armband. However, we cannot put our players in the situation where they might be booked or even forced to leave the field of play. We are very frustrated by the FIFA decision, which we believe is unprecedented. We wrote to FIFA in September, informing them of our wish to wear the One Love armband to actively support inclusion in football, and had no response. Our players and coaches are disappointed. They are strong supporters of inclusion and will show support in other ways. And they did. They did show support in other ways. They managed to get their warm-up kit to bear rainbows on, and it was brilliant. Even freaking Mother Nature objected, and the Welsh-Iran match was preceded by a rainbow, and it was stunning. But things went from bad to worse. Not only had I immediately lost my faith for the governing body of the sport, but during the Welsh-America game, everything went even more tits up than it had already gone. For those of you who are unaware, the Welsh have bucket hats for support of our Welsh team. They are green, red, and yellow. Green and red, of course, from our flag. The green representing the bottom half of our flag, the red representing the dragon. And the yellow, believed to represent both the daffodil, which is our national flower, and the idea that when the bucket caps were released, that they were bringing Wales up to a new gold standard. And on top of these ordinary bucket hats, for the red wall, which is the name given to our football supporters over here, we have a second set of bucket hats that are created by a group called the Rainbow Wall, which is the name given to another set of Welsh team supporters who are campaigning for inclusion in football. They are set up specifically so that people like myself, who may be trans or gay or otherwise feel alienated from the sport of football, can join in and feel safe. And they have created bucket hats, which are beautiful. They are reversible. One side has the rainbow stripes and the cartoon dragon on the front, and if you turn it inside out, the cartoon dragon in the Welsh team's logo is a more realistic dragon, and rather than stripes, you've got bricks, which are the rainbow colours because they are the Rainbow Wall. And so many Welsh fans own these rainbow bucket hats. And upon attempting to enter the Wales versus America game, these hats were being confiscated. From most people, but from the reports I have read, primarily from female fans. Apparently, some more men got away with it than women, but from what I hear, most people were getting them taken off them. One of the people who had their hat confiscated as they tried to enter the pitch was Laura McAllister, who is an ex-captain for the Welsh women's football squad. I mean, yes, okay, wow. Oh, you can't wear your own team's hat, and you're a captain. Not that that makes it any better that other people lost their hats, obviously, but just takes it that one step further. It was insane. There was even a report I read that one American fan had a tiny rainbow flag on their person on the public transport, and a Qatari man threatened to beat them up because of it, insinuating that they were disrespecting Qatari culture, and that it took a group of American and Welsh fans to stop him from assaulting them. It's disgusting. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to say right now that I do think we should be respectful of other people's cultures, and I think that anyone complaining that they're not allowed to drink alcohol whilst at the World Cup need to get over themselves, because it's a really solid thing in their country, and it's not that big of a deal to stop drinking alcohol, you know? But by the same token, Qatar have been chosen and have opted into hosting a world event, a global event, and have invited other cultures into their country. We haven't just turned up. We're not just going on holiday there. They have hosted a global event, and therefore, by the same token that we should be respectful of their culture, they should be respectful of other cultures too, especially when it comes to human rights. You cannot be so horrible to people just because they are enjoying a sport that they are allowed to enjoy, but they're enjoying it in your country and you don't like that. If you are that averse to different cultures in your own country, then don't fucking host. Yes, we will respect you to a point, but you have to respect us too. I want to end most of these episodes with a quote. And although this isn't quite the end of this podcast, for reasons I will explain in a minute, this is where it was going to end originally, and the quote I chose was "Amma or heed," which isn't a quote like I would normally give. It's more a phrase, really, here in Wales. But it means we're still here. It is a really massive thing in Wales for our culture and our sports. It comes from the song of the same name, Yma o Hyd, by Dafydd Iwan Arlog, and is a part of the chorus. And the chorus states, Erweitha pawb a phopeth in Yma o Hyd, which translates to, in spite of everyone and everything, we are still here. And I picked it not only because of Wales being in the World Cup for the first time in decades, but because I think it's quite a poignant message. And I think it's become even more poignant since the tragedy that has befallen my home place, village, where I live, in recent days, which, for obvious reasons, I won't go into here. But I think it's a powerful message to remember that, yeah, things can get really rough, but we are still here. We're still here, we're still standing, we've still made it. And I think it's important to be proud of that, because I can pretty much guarantee that anyone hearing this has probably faced some serious adversity in their life. But you made it, and when things look shit again, just remember you've done it before. Maybe it was something different shit before, but you can do it. You can do it. You can make it again. Now, the reason that the episode was going to end here is because I was then planning to do a separate episode that I would have recorded around about this time after posting the first episode, and it was going to be a Christmas episode, with it being so close to Christmas. But with it being so late to now that I have finally got round to re-recording this, due to the stuff that's been happening locally, I have decided to include the Christmas elements of that episode into this one. And it's not going to be a whole Christmas special like I'd originally planned, but I thought I would share with you one of my favourite things to do with Christmas of all time. So this is one of my favourite Christmas things of all time. It was done by comedian Keaton Patty. If I'm mispronouncing that, I'm very sorry. And he made this tweet. I forced a bot to watch over 1,000 hours of Hallmark Christmas movies, and then asked it to write a Hallmark Christmas movie of its own. Here is the first page. I hope you are strapped in, because this is beautiful. It's called The Christmas on Christmas. And it is a script, so I will read it, and it's designed to be acted and stuff, as scripts are, so that's why it doesn't flow like a story as well, but I think it will still get the idea across. Interior, small town snow globe refillery. We see a single mother refilling snow globes with Christmas juice. She is widow. Her husband died in every war. Single mother. I refill globes better than Jesus Claus. Yet still my twins are dad-free. Oh, I thought I'd be alright to do this, because I've read it like hundreds of times. It's just so stupid. Yet still my twins are dad-free. Why? They need double dad. Businessman enters the shop. He wears clothes that cost money. His hands are briefcases. And he's Hallmark hot. Single mother continued. Hi, do your snow globes lack wet? Hurry, Christmas attacks soon. Businessman has flashback to when he was business boy. A Christmas tree explodes his family on purpose. He now hates trees and Christmas and explosions. He exits the flashback. Businessman, shut your sound. I am from huge city. I brought your land and am turning it into an oil resort. Single mother, rude behavior. This is a family business. I sell families. I am widow. My husband is now bones. Single mother points to her husband's bones in the corner of the room. They are all gift wrapped in eggnog. Businessman, all of my wives are bones. That is America. But I must make money for my twins to live. They are a prince. Single mother, I too own twins. Please don't have bought my land. Christmas is today. Businessman. Laugh. Not he laughs. Businessman says laugh. I bought Christmas and now it is never. Unless we go on dates. Single mother. I cannot date because of a snow curse. I pray Santa helps me. And the last piece of exposition to this first page of the script is Santa cannot help. She did not know, but Santa was her husband. Santa is Bones. Bones help nobody. And fucking cut. It's one of my favourite things ever. Oh, Jesus Christ. So, Keaton, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, thank you. Thank you so much for doing that. There are many AI-generated scripts that I adore, but that seemed most festive. Maybe I will include something Christmassy in the next episode as well, because we will still, if everything goes to plan, be pre-Christmas cutoff. So maybe I'll spread it out a bit rather than just doing it all this time. But I thought I had to include something festive, with it being the season to be jolly and all of that. So yeah, this was the first episode. I hope you enjoyed. It definitely feels like it went better than my first attempt at recording it, so I feel like it's an improvement, but of course you guys have nothing to base that on unless you saw the original recording, because I did live stream it, and although I didn't live stream this recording due to my current limitations with everything that's going on, I do intend to live stream the recording of, at the very least, most of the episodes of this podcast. And so if you're interested in being a part of those streams and watching it happen live, the pre-edit version of the podcast, then you can do so on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Geozaki. Geozaki is spelled Geozaki. And this should then be available on YouTube, and future episodes, when I bring back the webcam, if I'm able to next time, will be available on YouTube with a video version. This episode and the rest of the podcast, I hope, will also be available on potentially Spotify and Apple Podcasts, which is a long shot, but I'm going to try. And I'm hoping to try and keep up with a schedule of posting one episode per fortnight. I'm not sure which day yet. For the first few episodes, it will just have to be when I can get it done, especially with chances that my rota at work will change fairly soon. But I hope to have a lot of exciting stuff happen. Hopefully, episodes that are just me will be not hugely common, because I really like the idea of having guests and co-hosts and other fun stuff happening just to keep things different all the time and a lot more entertaining than just me talking to a microphone. But thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, I'm amazed that you put up with me for that long. Thank you very much. And hopefully I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe. Merry Christmas, and hopefully see you soon.